All right, so we have breaking news now coming into our newsroom. Apparently, it's being reported now from our folks on the ground that actually AP is reporting that Sean Diddy Combs has been denied bond. Now, what we know is that the parties were to return at about 5 p.m. today for a hearing to determine whether he would be released in anticipation of his sentencing. Again, earlier today, he was convicted of 2 of the lesser charges in this case involving prostitution and violations of the Mann Act, the federal Mann Act, which involved transportation for the purposes of prostitution. 2 counts of those. The higher counts of racketeering and sex trafficking, he was acquitted of those. So apparently he faced up to 10 years on both of those charges. But according to federal guidelines, and as I read the motions provided by both parties, prosecutors were asking for about 5 years based on federal guidelines. Defense attorneys were asking for about 2 years. Now remember, he's already spent about 10 months or so in prison. He was arrested back in December, actually turned himself in back in September. So it becomes very interesting to see why the judge decided the way he did. It seemed earlier today he had a discussion with Combs. He actually asked him, would you like to go outside? Would you like not to return to the Brooklyn house of detention? Of course, he said yes. It made it seem like maybe the judge might be leaning that way, but ultimately we're hearing reports that he has denied bond for Sean Diddy Combs. Let me bring in my guest quickly with us this hour. Criminal defense attorney and former assistant prosecutor Franz Borghardt is here to discuss. Franz, quickly, let me explain. I mean, essentially, the burden was on the defense to show this judge that, number one, he was not a flight risk. And was more likely than not, by preponderance of the evidence, that he was not a flight risk and not a danger to the community. What do you make of the judge's decision in this case?
I think that there's probably some strategy behind the decision. And frankly, Michael, I know it's going to seem counterintuitive to say this, but this may be a blessing in disguise for Mr. Combs. He is right at the guideline minimum for the amount of time he has served. And what a lot of the viewers may not know is the last year of a sentence, generally you end up in a halfway house, a federal halfway house. So him staying another 2 to 3 months in prison, I'm quite sure he doesn't want to do that, he'll probably have just a little bit over a year under his belt by the time he gets sentenced. And if that is the case, the judge might be in a position to be able to send him home at his sentencing. Now, this is federal court, so there's no way of knowing what the judge is going to do. But, this might just be a blessing in disguise for him.
Are you surprised that he wouldn't let him out under the circumstances? Again, people have to remember, and you mentioned it, state court, federal court, 2 very different things. Federal court, much different. I do want to mention that, again, when we talk about federal guidelines, there's levels to this thing. Prosecution was arguing that he was at a level 24, which would require 5+ years, versus the defense, which was arguing he's actually a level 16. And again, some of the factors that go into that are prior criminal history, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the other problems, they argued he turned himself in. He's basically obeyed the court since turning himself in. The jury, in fact, rejected some of the more serious charges. They were willing to have a bail. Bail set at $1 million. Again, he has no access to his plane or his passport. Were you surprised by this decision?
Michael, I was frankly surprised. The main reason I think he wasn't allowed release in the beginning at the detention hearings, plural, was because of the severity of the racketeering charge and what the racketeering charge carried if he was convicted. He's now been acquitted of that charge. And while the charges he was or today, like earlier today, while the charges he was convicted of today do carry 0 to 10 years each, he is very much releasable at this point. And by the way, has every reason in the world to show up now that he's at a lower guideline exposure. So frankly, I think the judge could have released him, and I think it would have been the just and fair thing to do. But again, I stand by my position that maybe this is a blessing in disguise for him.
Yeah, as far as flight risk goes, I would have to agree with you when I thought about this in terms of whether he would even decide to flee under these circumstances. Based on what he was facing, based on the guidelines, anywhere the high being about 5, 5.5, the low being between 2 and 3, I said he'd be ridiculous to flee. I mean, at this point, after having already served 10, he would flee. Now, you're right. Had he been convicted of the racketeering, that might be a very different story.
Well, and that's the kicker, right? Is he has every incentive under the sun to show up now. Because if he wouldn't show up, if he was released and he didn't show up, you better believe he was going to end up with more than 5 years on each count and possibly consecutive. As it stands now, he stands a very reasonable chance. He has a very highly likely chance of being released in the near future. I mean, he went from being exposed to a life sentence this morning to very much he has an out date and he will be getting out in the near future. So I don't think flight's the issue. And it's not as if he can't secure the bond. I don't know what, frankly, Michael, I don't know why the judge doesn't let him out, other than if the judge is thinking, look, I'm putting him in a position maybe later to give him either a credit for time served resolution, which would be maybe a 2-year deal where he ends up in a halfway house or home incarceration. But I think that may be the method behind the madness here. Is maybe the judge is thinking long term at the sentencing and not as to just the detention. Or it might be that the judge believes that even though he was convicted of these lesser charges, his criminal culpability might be higher than that, and as such doesn't want him released yet.
Yeah, absolutely. They sit there and listen to the evidence as well. And as the prosecution argued, these were serious charges. And you may want to send a message that, look, even though these were lesser charges, doesn't mean they weren't just as serious. There were serious victims in this case as well.